right? So policies, they would take birth, right, with the conception of the government that a particular problem is required to be addressed through the means of a particular policy, and then they would be terminated where the government understands that the previous 5 stages have been completed, right? So once the policy has been applied, once the application has taken place by the different arms of government, then Lasswell understands that that would be a stage where policy can be terminated, right? And then Lasswell understands that the final stage or seventh stage would involve appraisal of the government's policy, meaning that after the termination, the government can make an assessment that how the particular policy fared in terms of achieving the objectives, right? So this is what in Lasswell's understanding would be the different stages which would follow a sequence, and once this sequence is completed, that is what would mean completion of the policy cycle, right? And to understand the policy, we are required to look at these stages, and once we have understood this cycle, we have understood the policy. So understanding public policy is what means the understanding of the cycle in Lasswell's understanding. Now, two things, very quickly, I will point out in terms of looking at the limitation of Lasswell's understanding of public policy. Right, one, that in Lasswell's understanding, only government is an actor as far as the whole policy making process is concerned. Meaning that right since the inception of the problem, right since the government decides that a particular problem is required to be addressed through the means of a policy, then only and only government and government actors, they have a role in the policy making process, its implementation, and its appraisal. That is one, right? Second thing, possibly which Lasswell could not appreciate is that appraisal of the policy may be required mid-term rather than after the termination of the policy, meaning that once the policy has been terminated, then nothing can be done after that, right? So the policy has come to an end, and the once the policy has ended, then that would mean that no significant changes or mid-course correction or any modification in the policy would be possible, right? Whereas the next model that we are going to look at, that is Gary Brewer's, right? Gary Brewer, that we'll try to look at in the next class, right? So that is where Gary Brewer, he kind of modifies Lasswell's cycle, and he adds that as far as the government's policies are concerned, right, the government's policies, they do not have a birth and death cycle, right? So that's what is the second limitation in Lasswell's understanding of but sorry, please come again. Appraisal, right? Appraisal, right? This is appraisal, right? Appraisal means that you are trying to make an assessment of the policy, right? You are trying to make an assessment of the policy with the help of the data in terms of looking at the objectives that were achieved after the application of the policy, and trying to understand that whether all the objectives that the government had originally intended were government had originally intended were achieved through the means of policy. So that's what would be an appraisal of the policy, right? So whether the policy fared good, or whether the policy remained short of meeting its objectives. So this is what would be done at the appraisal stage of the policy, right? So that's where I was trying to add that when we are trying to look at the policy cycle of Lasswell, we understand that Lasswell declares termination of the policy even before appraisal, right? So appraisal should not be the last stage in the view of many of the policy analysts or in the view of many of the scholars, because a particular policy may require a mid-course correction, which can very well be done when a policy has been evaluated mid-course, right? Meaning that during the implementation, during the application itself, when one is trying to make an appraisal of the outcomes of the policy, then it would become possible to make changes which may be required to meet the desired objectives. So that's what was significant in the case of the example, or in the case of the case that I narrated at the beginning of this discussion, that Abhayananda not only decided that this would be the course of action, but for mid-course correction, he would be in constant touch with the people who would be responsible for the application or the execution of the policy, right? So mid-course correction play a very important role in terms of significantly improving the policy in terms of meeting its objectives, right? And this mid-course correction would be based on the actual assessment or appraisal of the policy during the execution or application of the policy itself. So once the policy has been terminated, then even if you make an appraisal of the policy, then it would be a kind of valuable data, or it would be a kind of knowledge for the future policies. But the policy which has been declared to have come to an end, no, that cannot be further modified, or that cannot be further changed in order to meet the desired objectives, right? So that's what we understand broadly as far as the limitations of the Lasswell's policy cycle approach is concerned, right? As I told you, number one, Lasswell's sole focus is on the government when he is trying to look at the actors who matter in the policy studies. And number two, the way Lasswell understands that appraisal should be the last stage in the cycle that does not leave any scope for the mid-course correction in a particular policy, right? So that's where possibly we can stop and